Space over.
I've got confidence. I've got confidence. Yep, done. Redirected to the left. Right. And check the sound.
I know.
All right, get off.
Yeah.
All right, make it so.
God, this is taking longer than I thought it would, I must say.
Because Arthur, even though I agree with everything you said, I still knew that you were just like, oh, we're just minutes away. It's the home front stretch. Yeah, sure it is. Because I believe two things at the same time, two opposite things at the same time. One is that I believe that Bibi is not necessarily doing what's the best for Israel, but maybe for the best for him. But at the same time, I also believe, as you do, that if we don't address this, we're kicking the can down the road. So I believe two opposite things at the exact same time. But I do believe we're kicking it down the road if we don't really try to cut the head off of this. But because it will just come back, as it always does.
The irony is that I think we've actually eradicated Hamas, but the war continues. You know what I mean? It's like they didn't get the memo. You've lost. So the fighting goes on.
Yeah, you could say that for sure. Or I wonder if again, going back to my more cynical view, which is so long as there's the appearance of threat, even if it's not there, then that it's in Netanyahu's best interest as a way of continuing to solidify his position and his power to be able to kind of make that statement. Now, but the fact is that there's an entirely plausible, legitimate thing going on in the north and also in the far east. So let's just be done with Gaza already and just let them realize that they are defeated, as opposed to us trying to.
There's a vacuum of power there.
Yeah, although admittedly though, the killing of Sinwar, which was just recently, is what, a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. It was a really important step in the psyche of the Israeli people. There's no question about it. I mean, it's kind of like after 9/11, things felt still unclosed until Osama bin Laden was killed.
It's going to be tough in Gaza because sooner or later they're going to have to rebuild, right? And how are you going to rebuild until you have security? And only Israel can ensure the security. So they've got to set up like what they call gated, safe areas where the people can live and rebuild and go to school and food safely, so that they can.
It's true. It's true.
Try and rebuild.
Yeah, it's true. Although this was always, I think, not just my issue, but I think pretty much across the board, was that there was a sense that we didn't really have a long-term plan. And it's like, and we still don't. And that concerns me, but I'll worry about that long-term issue later. Right now, it's just get the hostages back, get safety back,
Yeah. Right.
The question I have,
Yeah.
how do you support people without supporting the government?
I don't know. Because we know that when we tried to support people over and over again, it just got stopped, midway and went to their government and but the whole hope is that it's not about that they're so defanged at this point that maybe that we've entered into an entirely different stage, which I think is possible. I do. I think that if there's one thing that I've learned over the years, it's that there's a lot of groupthink that comes out of Gaza and out of the various different Arab countries in which, I understand that I'm speaking in generalities, but the momentum, the tide shifts very quickly. You go from being everyone all in on this to everyone all in on this to everyone all in on this, and they don't have quite, I think, again, I'm now being completely overgeneralizing, and I know it, but I don't think that they have nearly the independent thought of individuals coming out of, like Gaza, or it's not as much individual independent thought, I think. I don't think.
A lot of it is driven by Iran, I think.
Yeah, sure.
Until we deal with Iran, it'll be an insoluble problem.
Yeah, sure. The whole thing is a mess, but I'm actually feeling a little bit more hopeful these days than I have been before. I'll tell you, and I know that the state of Israel is considerably smaller, and Lebanon and Israel are considerably smaller than, Afghanistan or Pakistan. But, how many years did it take for America to find Osama bin Laden and then take him out? It took what, like 4 years, 5 years maybe?
No, it was longer than that.
Longer than that?
10 years.
10 years?
9/11 was 2001, and they took him out in around 2008.
Right, so maybe
It was Obama's administration.
right, no, definitely, I remember that famous kind of, the picture. So, but when was it in Obama's administration? I'm not sure.
2009, 2010.
Okay, so fine, so it could have been 8 years. Whereas, in 1 year, Israel found every single one of the highest level leaders from both Hezbollah and Hamas, and in 1 year has executed them all. And again, I understand that it's not nearly as, like we have less ground to cover. I get it. But we're also just Israel and not America.
Remember, the analogy isn't that good either, because the Taliban are now in charge of Afghanistan even after 20 years there.
True.
And I don't think Israel wants to spend a lot of time in Gaza locally.
No.
So
I'm only talking about, though, our ability to locate. That's pretty impressive. Anyways, all right, I see 10:01. Nice to have everyone here. Welcome. This is, as you know, I teach a couple of weekly classes, one on Monday mornings and one on Tuesday evenings, and I certainly invite you to come to those two, whether by Zoom or in person. The one on Monday mornings is Torah. We kind of go take the Torah verse. We are currently in the book of Exodus, and we are going to continue in Exodus for maybe a couple months until we reach the 10 Commandments, and after the 10 Commandments, it is my choice to switch to go to Joshua and Judges, and then Samuel and Kings. I just find it to be more interesting. If anyone objects, don't come. Right, seriously. Or fire me. Fire me. I've been doing this tour. I'm waiting for someone to take over for me. So, but the one on Tuesday evenings is a lot of fun. For me, it's a lot of fun. It's my favorite thing that I've done here in a long time because it really gets me kind of learning as much as I do. You know, it's because we take the book, the text called Pirkei Avot, which is the ethics of the sages. This was, by the way, Arthur's idea, but what wasn't Arthur's idea, his idea was just to study the text. Good idea, but I decided that I would simply use that as a launching point because what I really like doing is studying the sage who made the statements and learning about that person and learning maybe, if we can, what may have led or driven that person to making those statements, and which has been kind of like a really fun model. And so I invite you to come to both in the future. In addition, I teach a number of one-off classes. What are one-off classes? They are when we look at the calendar, I try to fill in when I see, oh, there's something, you know, let me teach here, let me teach something there, so these are just single classes, not, you know, repetitive or building on each other. So as we often and always do, we begin with saying a very blessing. Just trying to let these people in and mute everybody. We start with the blessing for studying Torah, or any of our texts. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzotav v'tzivanu v'hitatef That's la'asok b'divrei Torah. That's what happens when you're not fully paying attention, which is a problem. La'asok means to busy yourself. So in modern Hebrew, esek is business. So la'asok is to busy yourself. La'asok b'divrei, which means in the things or words, Torah. So, and in truth, Torah study is a discipline which is not necessarily limited to Torah. When in Jewish tradition, when you say, oh, we're doing Torah study over here, it could be that we're studying this. It could be that we're studying artwork of Bergen-Belsen. You know, in other words, Torah study has the capacity to be very broad. But today we're studying what I call the great debates. So this isn't anything which is objective, rather subjective. I just took a couple of what I consider to be classic debates throughout Jewish tradition. I didn't pick I know there are some biblical ones that I could have picked from, like Abraham arguing with God over whether God should save Sodom and Gomorrah. Coulda, chose not to. I picked three. I picked ones that are a little bit more modern, not modern by any stretch of the imagination. And I thought what we would do, and I kind of paraphrased the great debate, these three great debates, based upon original writings, based upon the primary sources, but I created a debate, if that makes sense. What I mean by that is a myth. These are all mythical debates, but not myths. They are real debates. They just didn't happen in a debate forum. Now, actually, when I mentioned the notion of the great debates, and I mentioned it to my father, he immediately chimed in with another important debate, which isn't included here, but which we did discuss last year. So I'm not going to include it. I didn't include it, but the reason why I'm pointing this out is because really one of the truly most important debates are the ones that happened in Spain, the disputation at Tortosa and then the disputation at Barcelona. These were two but staged spectacles. So they were debates, but with not really a debate. These are real debates with the answers not being clear. Well, to me they are, but that's just because I have an opinion. But that doesn't mean that they are clear, if that makes sense. So let's get to them. So we're going to try to spend like 20 minutes on each one of these. So we can, or yeah, 25 minutes on each one of these. So if you see me kind of rushing at some point, it's just because I'm trying to get to the next one. And we're going to start with the Baal Shem Tov and the Vilna Gaon. So has anyone heard of these? So Baal Shem Tov, I'm assuming most of you have heard of. But you've probably heard of the Baal Shem Tov within the context of me saying something like, the Baal Shem Tov once said, or me saying something like, there's a story about the Baal Shem Tov. So the Baal Shem Tov, they're both the Vilna Gaon and the Baal Shem Tov are both from the 18th century, both from Eastern Europe. The Vilna Gaon means genius, Vilna of Vilna. So that's in Poland, I'm pretty think. And the Baal Shem Tov was in Ukraine. So close, but not right next to each other. I mean, the nations are right next to each other, but close, but they weren't next door neighbors. So both of these two were exceptional intellects, but their values of how to but their method for the highest level of Jewish kind of connection was different. And they lived at roughly the same time, and they, even though they never actually debated each other officially, like this was an exceedingly alive debate. And so let me just say one more thing, and that is that the Baal Shem Tov was the founder of something called the Hasidic movement. And yes, when you hear Hasidic now, it's the same Hasidic, but the difference is that Hasidic then and what we think of, or what you might think of as Hasidic now, are different. Like oftentimes a person says Hasidic Jew, and they're saying it as a synonym for an ultra-Orthodox Jew. But it's not. Hasidic really is a subset of ultra-Orthodox Judaism. And now it's really just the devotees. You're a Hasidic Jew if you're a devotee of the Baal Shem Tov or of that kind of line, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily are still totally true to the original values of the Baal Shem Tov, but we'll see what I'm talking about in a second. So in the Vilna Gaon, yes?
What is the time period of this?
18th century. So now the Vilna Gaon, on the other hand, was the leader of what was called the Mitnagdim. Now Mitnagdim, interestingly, when I translate it for you, is going to be kind of come out as like a pejorative. So neged means against. So like the Mitnagdim are essentially the opposition. So when a group has the term, opposition, it suggests that there's kind of the one foundational piece, and then there's the opposition to it. And it's certainly possible that in many ways, that in the same way that in modern politics, when you have the opposition party, it means the one doesn't have the majority. And so perhaps why it was referring to them as the opposition is merely because there were more followers of the Baal Shem Tov than there were of the Vilna Gaon. Maybe. I'm not exactly sure. I actually don't think so, but I'm considering that as a possibility. So what I'm going to do is, let's read this. And I will tell you, by the way, in each one of these lines, which is the original text, this primary source text. So why don't we do this? Instead of, this will give me a little break. I will let you guys do some reading. So I need someone to play the part of the Baal Shem Tov, and another person, thank you, Rob, and another person to play the part of the Vilna Gaon. Thank you, Sandy. So you're the Vilna, so you guys have this little conversation. And by the way, I'm going to, after each line, before you continue reading, before you switch people, I'm just going to tell you what the primary line is. So go ahead and start.
No matter what the circumstances, God is very close. The best way to find God is to pray with complete concentration. Whoever lives in joy is doing his Creator's will.
Last sentence, whoever lives in joy is doing his Creator's will. It's not to say that the other stuff he didn't say, he did, but not part of this primary source text. Go ahead.
God may be close to us, but the best way to find God is by studying the Torah. Torah is all-encompassing and has everything we need. Everything that was, is, and will be is included in the Torah.
Last sentence, everything that was, is, and will be is included in the Torah's original text. Go ahead.
Study is important, but our main purpose is that one should cling to God and attach himself to the Spirit and light of God. That is best found in prayer, not study, because the essence of worship is the feeling of oneness with God.
So in this particular case, study is important is not the original text, and also that is best found in prayer, not study, because not in the original text.
Prayer is important, but God's plan for us and the world is laid out in the Torah. There is no way to discover God's will other than the regular study of Torah.
Second sentence, primary. Keep going.
Everything created by God contains a spark of holiness. Everything we do can create a spark. If you are full of joy, you are full of love. Singing, dancing, and intense prayer. These express faith, which is the clinging of our souls to God.
Yet this, virtually the whole thing is primary text.
If you lead people away from study, you lead them away from observing the commandments. If you lead them away from the law, they will sin. So what you are doing is itself a sin.
None of it is original, but it was just trying to, and by the way, the next line is not original too.
No,
If it isn't original, where's it coming from?
and
Me.
love and God.
Well, is it coming from this?
All of the, Sava'at HaRivash, by the way, is the primary source which was written by the disciples of the Baal Shem Tov. They also included elements of what the Vilna Gaon said and included that as a part of a debate. That said, the stuff which I saying is not original was just me writing it in, giving you a little bit of a kind of to help continue to shape the debate. But it's not to say that I was just pulling this. This is like common understanding, but it's more like the way that a person would describe it now as opposed to what was in the primary sources. So we have one more line, right? Sid, is it you, I think, the sage?
The sages have said, Talmud Torah, Neged Kulam, the study of Torah takes precedence over everything. That is the way it must be. Who are you to say differently?
Okay, so the first sentence, but not the last. Who are you to say differently is. All right, so that's the story. That's the debate. So let's try to unpack this debate a little bit. We could do it line by line, or we could just do it more generally, because I think you're getting the general sense by this. You have the Baal Shem Tov, who is committed to creativity, committed to joy, committed to singing, committed to praying, committed to bringing God close to me. You know, and the Vilna Gaon, on the other hand, is committed to Torah study. And that's been but it's not to say that, this is some wild belief. Judaism really was about study. I mean, at its origins in the Talmud, for example, it wasn't about all the praying that they were doing. They were just kind of creating the sense of prayer. Everything about Jewish tradition was just about studying the Torah and understanding how God is in our lives based upon the secrets that the Torah can share with us. But then the Baal Shem Tov came around and said, there's way more. It's not just about Torah study. God is all around us. So I was fortunate enough to go out on a boat yesterday. Although I say fortunate. One direction, it was lovely, and then coming back, it was like I turned into an ice cube. But the point is that, but as I'm sitting out there on the water, and I'm sure that a lot of you feel this way, it's like the expanse and the vastness of the water, and you're just like, wow, this is extraordinary. Or also, it would happen a lot when I would, two other places, top of a mountain and in the desert. These are my places in which I'm kind of become more attuned to God, right, in nature. You know, and I'm sure that I can't, not everybody, and I know not everybody, but something tells me that a lot of you also can identify with what I'm talking about when I kind of like identify these places in which you kind of sense God more than others, let's say. That's a very Baal Shem Tovi thing of you, right? When you're here at the synagogue and, you know, actually this is probably the worst crowd to ask this of, but, right? But like, you know, when do you feel most connected? When you're here studying Torah? Or, again, that's why you're not, right? But you get my point. Like, you know, take you out of it for a moment and just think just of others. You know, like, are the people feeling most connected when we're at a Purim carnival, or when we're, you know, or instead when you're at Torah study? Now, again, bad group to ask the question for, but you get my point. But actually quite a good group to ask the question for, because this proves the very debate which the Vilna Gaon and Baal Shem Tov are talking about. To a lesser extent, but somewhat. Yeah, Morris.
I know you said 18th century. Did their lives overlap?
Yes.
And were they aware of each other?
Yeah. Well, no, totally aware of each other, completely. Again, in this primary source, the Baal Shem Tov references them, and the Vilna Gaon was as strong of a character as he was precisely because he was trying to stand tough against the Baal Shem Tov. And again, let me say it this way. For those of you who've been in my Sages class, you've probably heard, we've talked at a number of times about what I consider to be a fascinating thing, which is that, you know, there's these two early rabbis, one was named Hillel and one was named Shammai. And you probably know the famous story about you know, the guy who says, "Teach me the Torah while standing on one foot." Right? You've heard this, and you know, and Shammai says, "Get out of here." And Hillel says, "No, I can do it for you. You know, don't do to your neighbor what you wouldn't want done to yourself. What's hateful to your neighbor, don't do, you know, what's hateful to you, don't do to your neighbor." Thank you. And, you know, and everyone's like, I'm sure, like me, we all are like, yeah, this is just yet another example of why Hillel was better than Shammai. Right? Shammai was irritable. Shammai was angry. Shammai was dismissive. Hillel was open. Hillel was, come, everyone can learn. Let me just teach you anything I can teach you. Right? And we've talked in the Sages class about this and about which one who was right. And obviously our first instinct is Hillel. Of course. Why would it ever be okay? Or why would we ever prefer the person who pushes away to the person who welcomes it? But the argument that we just have been discussing over and over again, and which I really do believe to be the case, is, yeah, but here was Shammai who realized that he and Hillel, just the two of them, were tasked with trying to continue our Jewish tradition and to make sure that it was going to keep moving into the future generations. And Hillel was saying, anybody come, learn a little bit. But by doing so, he was potentially really, really diluting Judaism. Saying, oh, you can just learn about this, and then a person thinks that they know Judaism and walks away and says, because they know the one story about Purim, for example, but doesn't know anything else, and suddenly believes himself to be like the student of the great Hillel. Whereas Shammai was like, no, we need people who are going to learn everything so we can have a secure future and a secure tradition. You know, like, if all we have are a bunch of people who know a little bit, then there's no way that Judaism is going to flourish in the future. Shammai was saying, I've got to have a cadre of 10, 20 people here who then can go and know everything and can be the next person to transmit everything, instead of having things lost through history. And the Vilna Gaon and the Baal Shem Tov, similar. Now again, different only because generations had gone, and so there are way more Torah scholars and than there were back in the time of Hillel and Shammai. But what the Vilna Gaon is saying is, we have a pure discipline here and a pure ritual and faith here. And by going around and saying, oh, you can create that connection to God simply by dancing and by smoking hashish and having like this kind of mystical experience, and that's your way of getting close to God. And people like me would say, yeah, when I'm on top of a mountain, that's when I feel closest to God. But the Vilna Gaon is saying, no. Yeah, you might feel it, but the real way to get close to God is by study. And the Baal Shem Tov was saying, it's not to say study's not important, but the Baal Shem Tov would say prayer is more important than study.
So it's like knowledge versus feeling?
Yeah, very much. Very, very much. And that was the debate of these two. And by the way, it's still going on to this day. If you go to the ultra-Orthodox world, in Israel, let's say, or Borough Park, or wherever you want to go to, then you will find that, sure, they pray 3 times a day, as they're supposed to, but they can get that prayer done in 15 minutes each. And they spend the rest of the day studying. So for them, prayer is an obligation, study is the joy. What are we about to say?
And a couple thoughts. One is, I definitely lean towards more, being nature.
Yeah,
And
I'm sure most of us do.
yeah. But I will say that, we're new members, and, I grew up going to a very reformed synagogue, more reformed than this synagogue. And even though I don't know what all the Hebrew words mean, during the Friday services, I can, the beauty of the words, the beauty of the sounds, they kind of flow over you.
Yeah.
And so I consider that kind of the Baal Shem Tov. Now, on the flip side of that is I work with a lot of different types of people, and I work with a lot of leaders. And one thing I always look for is their desire to study and learn as like a hallmark of leadership. And what I mean by that is, it's one thing to feel really good and kind of feel a spirit within you, but I also think there's definitely a rigor and discipline that it's not just understanding what the Torah means and interpretation. It's also the refinement of your learning discipline that I think is also important. And I do think people really miss out on that sometimes. They're so busy dancing, having the experience. What's it like to really delve into something very deeply and really challenge your thinking? And that's something that is not very easy to do, and I think people can miss out on that discipline as well.
Agreed. I agree. There's definitely room for both, and there's room, yeah, I agree with you, yeah.
But are they mutually exclusive? Why can't you do both?
You can. The issue had to do with priority. But you definitely can. But again, issue is about priority and not about whether you can do both.
I think God, to an extent, gives us the answer in the Torah, because part of the Shema, at the end of the Shema, God says to the Jewish people, be mindful of all my mitzvahs and do them, so shall you consecrate yourself to me. So if you really want to be close to God, be consecrated unto Him, do the mitzvahs. Therefore, study.
Well, but the mitzvot are available to us without studying. Someone can tell us the mitzvot. We don't need to study it, and therefore we can...
Well, but there are a lot of them. Right? There's 618.
13, yep.
13.
No, it's true, but yeah.
Just to respond, I think you're making a great point. But I also, when I hear so many of the prayers on Friday night, we look into the stars, we view the heavens, and it's sort of more of, I always think it's more of that, awe. There's a lot of, I love the Jewish prayers because there's so much awe in them. And so I consider that also part of that nature and that part as well.
You're a Kabbalist.
You are a Kabbalist.
I might be. And I don't know it.
So, here, I wrote down a couple of things, and I'm going to ask you questions. So why don't we start this way? the goal, I'll start us and then so the goal, what's the Baal Shem Tov's goal?
Joy.
Exactly correct.
What did you say, joy?
Joy.
Joy.
Now, what's the Vilna Gaon's goal?
Learning.
Observance, knowledge. Right? So, again, but that's an important distinction. Joy versus knowledge/observance.
They're not mutually exclusive.
They're not exclusive, but again, agreed, but we have to think of it not in terms of one or the other, but rather what's the priority? Like, am I trying to achieve joy, or am I trying to achieve, a joy through Judaism and through God, or am I trying to achieve joy, a level of duty and obligation and observance, not in a bad way, but obligation and observance. And maybe it will lead to joy, perhaps it will, but regardless if it leads to joy, it's still my goal is, do I do it right? And am I dutiful in the way that I'm doing it? Please.
So Shammai does value joy?
Shammai, you know what? I'm sure, yes. But that doesn't mean but again, it just wasn't his. And remember, Shammai is from 2,000 years earlier. But it just doesn't mean Vilna Gaon. Yeah, no, Vilna Gaon was perfect. Of course he valued joy. But it just wasn't his goal. If someone said, I feel joy of God because of my connection right now, the Vilna Gaon would say, wonderful, what text led you to that? And the Baal Shem Tov would say, it's a wonderful feeling, isn't it? I think that's probably the way to describe it. What about, go ahead.
I wonder if we need to define what joy is.
Yes, it's a good point. And there's no way that's such a huge, I would say this, I have defined joy in my life regularly, but that doesn't mean it's the correct definition for this, but I will tell you what my definition of joy is. And that is, joy can be best defined when put in comparison to fun. And fun is in the moment, and joy is timeless. Right? So, and the reason why I had that's just right off the top of just because I talk about it with bar mitzvah families typically. I say, look, your party is going to be fun, but the service itself is going to be joy. And you might get a little joy out of the party, but it's mostly fun. You'll get very little fun out of the service, but it's a lot of joy. Right? And so joy is not something which, like, the moment it's over, it stops. You all here, if you experienced a bar or bat mitzvah in your family, are still have the residue of the joy of that bar bat mitzvah. You can just give yourself enough time in a quiet room with your eyes closed to think back. You can probably bring out a lot of the joy that you remember. But you don't have any, but when you were at at the Six Flags, theme park in DC, you may have had fun on a roller coaster, but it's over. And now fun's over. Happens, it's over, right? So joy and fun. But that's the best way for me to define joy. It's hard. I think. I mean, anyone else can tell me what they think the definition of joy is, but that's the best one I've come up with.
How do you define prayer?
Prayer is, I believe, the active conversation between you and God. I believe.
Don't forget about love, because you get a lot of joy out of love.
That's true.
What was that?
Love.
Love.
You get joy out of love. That's true, for sure.
I was thinking about that conversation between you and God. That doesn't always use words either.
Correct.
You can. But I was thinking you were.
And by the way, and right, And correct, and think about this, so let's just use the mountain metaphor, or the water metaphor, or the desert metaphor. For me, for you guys, it could be a hike, it could be, it could be in your grandchildren's house. I'm not trying to define what it is, but what I'm saying is that prayer certainly can be wordless, and that was the emphasis of the Baal Shem Tov. Prayer. Some sort of conversation that's happening between you and God. Whether it's, and certainly doesn't have to be with words, because we can all, I think, assume that you can pray without speaking, and I don't think anyone here actually believes that the louder you say something, the more likely it is for God to hear. In just the same way as I often joke about during services, that the number of times you say a prayer does not increase the likelihood that it's going to work.
Do you think there's any aspect of this, and I know this is a little bit strange, but it seems like Baal Shem Tov he's making a bigger tent for people to participate.
Absolutely.
And so, is it a little bit more exclusionary to, say the pathway is through the Torah?
Yes, 100%, and that was the problem with Shammai. He was constantly pushing people away. Remember the guy teach me the Torah on 1 foot. No, get out of here. Guy wanted to learn Torah, but he just wanted to learn the Reader's Digest version of the Torah. And Shammai said, I will not cheapen the words of Torah by giving you the Cliff Notes version. I will only teach you the whole Torah. Meanwhile, Hillel said, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. All the rest is commentary, go and learn it at your own speed, at your own pace, whenever you want to. And again, there is no right or wrong to this answer, because one's bringing more people into the fold, enabling more people to be able to experience the joy or the connection that Judaism has to offer. The other one says, we have a beautiful pearl here in our hands, and that's Judaism. And why would we want to cheapen it by only letting people have half the pearl?
Second half of Hillel's response to the important, go and study.
Go and learn it, yep. It's for sure. What he's saying is there's so much more here, now you can do it on your own, but I've just given you the entrance, to this little taste, and now it's on you. Right, again, so Hillel and Shammai are not the Baal Shem Tov and the Vilna Gaon. They're different, for sure, but they are. There is metaphor or analogy between them. Yeah.
It does seem though that if it doesn't bring you joy, or even happiness, or pleasure, or fun, then you won't do it.
Right, but part of it is the Vilna Gaon certainly wanted joy to emerge from this, but that wasn't his goal. His goal was observance, and his goal was the purity of our text and understanding our text. And if joy comes out of it, that's why we said it's not mutually exclusive. You're right, it's not mutually exclusive. But if you get both, wonderful. But the Vilna Gaon was like, but I don't need you to have joy from this. I want you to have joy, but I don't need you to have joy from this. I just want you to study it. And the Baal Shem Tov would have said, you're not connecting at all. All you're doing is reading words here, unless it's doing something. The Baal Shem Tov wouldn't have said you shouldn't. If there was certainty that the study was going to lead to full-blown joy, then the Baal Shem Tov would have said, knock yourself out. But he just wants the joy there.
Personality disposition differences.
For sure.
It seems like Baal Shem Tov's climbs his proverbial mountain, everything's golden.
Yep. Although I will say, though, interestingly, that, and this shouldn't surprise anyone, but, the Baal Shem Tov grew up in kind of poverty and lived a life of poverty, even as famous as he was. Whereas the Vilna Gaon kind of grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth, and that was why it was so easy for him to be going from one school to another and learning and kind of in a snobby way saying, if you're not studying at the highest level, then you're really not, doing it correctly. So there is that for sure. But that shouldn't necessarily take away from what I consider to be a valuable, because it's not like every one of his followers, the Vilna Gaon's followers, also had that same privilege, but they believed in it. So it's not fair to truly put that on them, but there is some truth to it. What about, so I have used in the synagogue in the past, you've probably heard me say something like, we've been doing a lot I'll say something like, the sages note that there are two types of prayer. One's called keva, one is called kavanah. Keva means fixed, kavanah means spontaneous. So, in other words, and that's the type of prayer. So fixed prayer is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lecha min haaretz. Written down for you, you know exactly how it's supposed to go. Spontaneous prayer is, oh God, I cannot begin to tell you how grateful I am that I have come across this loaf of bread. I'm starving here, and you and your abundance of grace and love to me enabled me to turn from on this path over to the right, only to find a bag of bread which says, please take for anyone who needs. Thank you, God. Right? Basically the exact same prayer, just said entirely differently. One is the one that's been written down for us and that we say, the other one is spontaneous. Or said differently, maybe this is more one you can sink your teeth into. Sim shalom tova uvracha. Grant peace, O God, your most precious gift. Or, I just pray for world peace. Right? Same exact thing. One's keva, one's kavanah. The Baal Shem Tov would say, any words that come out of your mouth, if you are directing them to God, thanking God for this loaf of bread that just miraculously came into my possession, thanking God for creating a sense of peace because you have been feeling so up, that this world is topsy-turvy. That's the Baal Shem Tov style. Meanwhile, the Vilna Gaon would say, you want peace? Let's go deep into the word shalom in the Talmud and see what it has to say. And maybe, just maybe, we will learn nuances about the word Talmud and about about sim shalom, and we'll see that maybe we have just been understanding the concept of peace wrong. I'm using this as, this is not specific, but you understanding what I'm trying to say. So what about, so both of them cared about the Talmud, but one of them cared about the stories of the Talmud, called Agadah, kind of more like me. And the other one, as you can imagine, cared about the laws of the Talmud. I don't think I need to tell you who prioritized stories over law and who prioritized law over stories, but that was one of their emphases. And then finally about, what's the result? The goal we talked about, but also the result. The Vilna Gaon, the result is knowledge, and for the Baal Shem Tov, closeness.
Yeah. I think the Orthodox view is sort of consistent with the idea of actions and words precede feelings. It's more important that you act even if you don't have the feelings. This will come. If you wait for the feelings, the actions will never come, because the feelings may never come. The actions and the word you're in control over, you can exercise that option every day. And sooner or later, the feelings will come.
Well, I think what you're referencing is that part from the Torah which says, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and then we will listen.
Right.
And, and the argument, well, shouldn't you listen first and then do? And what Arthur is saying is, no, you do, and then you understand it afterwards. But, yeah, for sure. But in Israel today, there are, it's really fun because and I mean this, it's one day what I had to do is take a half day on an Israel trip and just do ultra-Orthodox hopping. And what I mean by that is like, go and note the various different types of ultra-Orthodox, because you've got some, and I just love them. There's one specifically called the breast lovers, and not lovers like they love the breasts. The breast like Breslau, or Chaim Nachman of Bratslav, who's the one who wrote "All the World is a Narrow Bridge, Just Don't Be Afraid." So Nachman of Bratslav was a follower of the Baal Shem Tov, and but the thing about it is, if you see this one type of ultra-Orthodox Jew, the Breslavers, they're my favorites, because they look, and again, I'm not saying what they are, I'm just saying how they appear. Drunk. They are always walking around just so happy. They are just, you see, you're in the middle of Jerusalem, you see them dance there in the streets. They're like, they're just, yes, ecstasy. And it's like, and I love watching them, and they come up and they've given out, have you ever seen those? It used to be, you all remember this because no one here is younger than me, except two or three of you guys. Remember those like Be Happy, faces, the yellow face with the big smile. They're going around with those stickers and giving them to people, like, just be happy. And you literally wonder, all right, what are they on here, right? And I have a couple of friends in Israel who my joy is just to find these people and just watch them, because it's infectious. The joy is infectious. They're just so happy, right? They're not in the middle of the yeshiva poring over the books. They're outside singing, and it's beautiful, right? And that is like about as natural of the continuation of the Baal Shem Tov as there. Let's move on. We went a little long on this one, but it was worth it because I love it. But it was worth it. Let's move on. Let's go to the Amsterdam rabbis versus Baruch, or some of you may know him as Benedict Spinoza. Now, first of all, let me just say that this Spinoza is from the 17th century, a little bit earlier. I think he was born in the mid 1600s and died in the also mid 1600s. Spinoza, by the way, lived for like 40 years. He died very young. Spinoza was of Portuguese descent, as were so many of the Jews of Amsterdam. There was a mass migration to Amsterdam following the expulsion from Portugal, which happened a year after the expulsion from Spain. And Spinoza, because many of you are familiar with Spinoza and his work just as a philosopher. You took philosophy in college, and Spinoza was one of the philosophers because he's one of the greats. And all of this, by the way, he did before the age of 40, because he died. Just to give you a sense, by the way, of how brilliant he was. So we're talking about, he created these brilliant kind of game-changing ideas when his brain was still developing. He's really a remarkable philosopher, theologian. So a Jew, though he changed his name to Benedict, he died a Jew, but he had definitely felt a disconnect from Judaism after what happened. Now, I realized, by the way, after the fact, after making this booklet for you, that I left out 2 lines, so I'll end up reading the last 2 lines. But suffice it to say that most of this, okay, so this was mined from Spinoza's book called Ethics. And also we do have documents from the excommunication documents. Because, oh, by the way, That's the end of the story, is Spinoza is excommunicated. Most of the Spinoza stuff is exact. A couple extra words here and there. The Amsterdam Rabbi stuff is half of it's original, half of it's me. But it still has you'll get the sense. It's pretty, again, a lot of that stuff that's me is just me putting in a couple extra words just to make the sentences, or just to make the linkage to make the debate flow. Now, this one, by the way, is an actual, again, it's not the debate that happened, because there wasn't really much of a Spinoza having the opportunity to sit there. He was able to face his accusers, but it wasn't the debate truly happening. It was him listening they debated amongst themselves, and then he listened to their answer. But so again, there's 2 lines at the very conclusion of this. Give me 1/2 second. There's 2 lines at the very conclusion of this, which I will add because I left it off the document. Yes?
I was unaware that we ever did excommunication. During what period of time was that?
So again, this is all happening, I mean, he was excommunicated in
Not when this happened. Over what period did we embrace excommunication?
2,000 years.
Okay.
Yeah. It's been going on forever. I mean, if we have a word, it's called cherem. It just means outside. They're not within the pale of our people anymore.
So don't listen to that, basically.
What do you mean?
Well, no, I mean, what happened when we excommunicated somebody?
Don't listen to, I see, no, sorry. Yeah, don't listen to them, and don't include them they're not welcome in the synagogue.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. So I need 2 readers. Who wants to be Amsterdam rabbis?
I'll be a rabbi.
Okay, not the rabbis. So wait, you'll go first, and then I need Spinoza. Bob, thank you. Go ahead. Marion, you go first.
We have long known of your evil opinions and deeds, and we have tried by various ways and promises to turn you from these evil ways.
Tell me of what I am accused.
We have received on a daily basis information about your abominable heresies concerning God, the soul, the commandments, and the Torah.
The freedom to philosophize and to say what I think. These I wish to vindicate completely.
Is it true you deny that God creates and rules the world? Is it true that you say that God and nature are the same? Is it true that you say that God exists only in a philosophical sense?
By God's direction, I mean the fixed and unchanging order of nature. I do not believe that there is a difference between saying that all things happen according to nature's law, or that they are regulated by God's decree and direction.
Is it true that you deny that the Torah and the soul are from God?
I hold that everything comes from nature, and that the method of interpreting the Torah is no different than the method of interpreting nature.
Is it true that you deny that the Jews are God's chosen people?
The individual Jew, taken apart from his social organization and government, possesses no gift of God above other men, and there is no difference between Jew and Gentile. At the present time, therefore, there is absolutely nothing which the Jews can claim to themselves beyond other people.
And then thank you. And then the last 2 lines, which are not there, again, not so important. I mean, it's important, but it's not so heavy. The rabbis then say, you shall be excommunicated and expelled from the people of Israel. And Spinoza says, I accept gladly this path which has been opened for me. So, okay. Now this is an enormous debate. And obviously I have my opinion about this. But again, this to some degree follows, it's different, but it's actually a very similar argument to the one that we just had. you know, the purity of the way things should be versus the free thinker who deviates from the way it's always been. I guess because that's ultimately what the Vilna Gaon and the Baal Shem Tov were also arguing about to some degree or another. So I'm realizing now at this moment, even though the debate's a classic, you know, I'm just realizing that there's a lot of similarities. Still, you have I've now said the Amazon rabbis and the American rabbis. Amsterdam rabbis. By the way, Amsterdam was amongst the most important central hubs of Jewish experience at that period. And so, and the Jews of Amsterdam had a lot of freedom and they were not, you know, compared to Jews in other places. I mean, Jews lived, you know, I think best compared to what it's like for Jews in America now was Jews in Amsterdam and you know, in terms of the maybe not quite, but there was obviously anti-Semitism, but you're getting my point. To live in Amsterdam as a Jew back in the 17th century was not a bad place to be for a Jew. And and Spinoza was ultimately is the patriarch of Reform Judaism. Even though no one will say, you know, we don't think back that far for, you know, as the architect of Reform Judaism, but he really is. Because he was the first person to say that you know, that we must take an intellectual and academic path towards understanding our tradition. We can't just go on faith. It's not just about this is what you were taught, so this is what it is. Nature is central. And you cannot, you know, and so Spinoza was saying things like, do not ask me to believe something which contradicts nature. Do not ask me to believe that humans were created a mere 5,785 years ago, when we know that the Sumerians were brewing beer 2,000 years prior to that. Do not ask me to believe, you know, these things when my very eyes defy that. I believe in nature. And I believe that when you say it's God, you can that's a synonym with saying that's the laws of nature. And you know, and you can't just say that's what we believe and that's what we always believe. Spinoza was the person who put those into words. And Spinoza was, again, remember, he's saying this when he's 34 years old. And so, you know, and so he was a strong and energetic voice. And the rabbis of Amsterdam were terrified. He was going to pull down the walls of Judaism by the way he's doing it. Arthur.
Well, I haven't quite composed this thought, so forgive me if it's a little bit dislocated, and it also may get me expelled from this class.
Excommunicated, yeah.
Can't wait to hear it.
He and I have a long history of this.
Yeah.
He's like the worst student.
I'm the anti-student.
That's right.
So I think for non-Reformed Jews, they would say that if you believe that God gave us the Torah, then you believe that Torah Judaism shows us through the parsha dealing with the Passover that God created nature, God controls nature, nature did not produce God. So the predicate is really the idea of the Torah reflecting God's wisdom, God's thinking, God's will. God tells us through the Torah and through the Pesach celebration that God, remember the plagues, God controlled the plagues, and therefore he controls nature.
Yeah. And I agree.
And I
And
think
Spinoza would say,
Spinoza was seen as actually, I think, as an atheist in that context.
no, but Spinoza would just say, yeah, but Spinoza would say, but I don't believe that God wrote the Torah.
I'm just giving the.
No, I hear you. But no, it's a good point. No, but what you're articulating is what the Amsterdam rabbis have
Do I
said
get to stay here for the time being?
for the next 5 minutes until you really say something upsetting to me.
So would you say that God told nature to part the Red Sea?
God caused the parting of the Red Sea. It did not happen as a natural phenomenon.
Or is there an entity called nature? Or is there an entity called nature, or is God
Around,
nature?
nature is in front of you, it's the trees, the sky, the air, the wind, the oceans, it's all part of nature, right?
But and I'm more subscribed to this, like, there's no differentiation to me between God and nature.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not arguing with you at all, of course, but I just always think, like, I believe in God, obviously, but when I read, like, God parted the Red Sea, I view that more as a metaphorical story that helps people explain it. It helps me get a grasp of it rather than like that's exactly how it happened.
Different horses for different courses.
Right.
Yeah.
Different, again, by the way, I'm happy to have the debate here too, but I certainly, my intention was not to tell you right or wrong from this. Good, Jim, go ahead.
The social context of the debates and what the rabbis were afraid of, and what Spinoza had to respond to, is this. He lived at a time when the Khmelnytsky massacres took place just a short while ago, 100,000 Jews killed in Eastern Europe. Secondly, a large number of Jews feeling persecuted joined Shabtai Tzvi, this false messiah, who ultimately converted to Islam. So even people from Amsterdam were joining that and going, saying he's going to lead us to the Holy Land. So they both had to come to terms with that. And the rabbis were afraid of this.
Further exodus, yeah.
Further exodus. And Spinoza responded, as I see it, Spinoza responded to it by saying that if you look at it from the standpoint of eternity, these things laws of nature. Plagues happen according to the laws of nature and such. And you can't claim a special status for the Jews that they are exempt from this and that God has chosen them. So that's great.
Right. Look, I think that what appears to be relatively clear is that you can see why I call Spinoza the architect of Reform Judaism. Because in just the same way that we believe, Reform Judaism institutionally believes that, that the Torah isn't God's word, but human words. But that doesn't mean you don't embrace the Torah, this is Reform Judaism, or love or cherish, but it just means that we recognize, maybe, institutionally, not individuals, institutionally that the Torah is not the product of God's writing. Now that said, look, Spinoza was it's easier now because, for us to say that because we live in an environment in which these ideas have been percolating for a long time. But for Spinoza, others had similar ideas. Maimonides Spinoza was influenced by Maimonides, Philo even too. So, but the difference is that Maimonides didn't believe in rational understanding of things to the exclusion of God, of the revelation of Torah, but rather in addition to. That Maimonides, who was a rationalist, though, always tried to find the rational behind the Torah, When the Torah was irrational, he made it rational. Spinoza, on the other hand, took those ideas of Maimonides, but said, I don't need to make it fit. I can say I believe in the rational to the exclusion of revelation. And that is more of the kind of reform. Now, again, I'm not, just because I say it's reform, so therefore I'm automatically drawn to it, to be sure. But at the same time, I really don't mean to make this about right and wrong, just rather the debate itself. But certainly we can't deny just how scared these Amsterdam rabbis were. Because what I didn't include in here, but I remember going to, there was I saw a play in DC probably about 15 years ago about something, Finding Spinoza or something like that, and it was fascinating. But that play, as well as, there's a woman named Rebecca Goldstein who's a real scholar in the world of Spinoza. Both of them have talked about just how conflicted the Amsterdam rabbis were. Because they knew that Spinoza was a Jewish prodigy. I mean, really, like, his knowledge of the Torah was exceptional. So he was their prize student. But the problem was that he was taking it way past what they were hoping he was going to learn, were learning from him. He took he learned everything from them and then went another mile past it, or kilometers since it was Amsterdam. And so 1.6 kilometers. But the point being, and so, like, they were conflicted because they didn't want to excommunicate their greatest student. They wanted him to be the next one of the great rabbis of that community. But he couldn't. And so they excommunicated him because they couldn't control him. And that is it's sad. But it does, look, it's easy for me to judge them knowing how brilliant Spinoza was. But the fact is that would I do anything so different than those Amsterdam rabbis? Probably not. What do I mean by that? If one of you said to me that, or better yet, if one of my confirmation students said to me that every Friday night they want to have a table up here in the Oneg Shabbat room because they believe in Jews for Jesus. They've learned everything I've taught them, and they really are the great scholar, kids. They're so smart and they've got so much ahead of them, but they also believe that all of our texts lead to the fact that Jesus should be our Savior. What would I do with that? I'd be like, no, not in our temple, right? And if they said, come on, don't you see this and that and this and that, and it's all Judaism but it's just, and I would say, it's too much for me. I'm scared of you. And I don't want you influencing other people in the synagogue, and I don't want you talking with the kids in your other classmates in confirmation class. I don't want this to be what is taught here. Right? That is essentially what was going on. They were scared. I'm scared of you. If only I knew you were just sending, and everyone was going to ignore you, but listen to you because you're a good kid. I'd be like, fine, but if I think that you are just impressive enough to convince half the congregation to believe in hopefully you understand this is also a made-up example, but it would terrify me, and I would excommunicate, in quotes, excommunicate that kid too.
It's the slippery slope part.
Yeah, right.
Well, I think you're really striking at the heart of this debate, especially with that last quote, which we didn't really get to, is like, what does it mean to be a Jewish person, right? And that goes to the previous debate as well. How does an individual define themselves as Jewish? Someone who is Jew for Jesus would say they are Jewish, but
they would, but we would say they're not.
But I wouldn't say that.
Right. Meanwhile, and Spinoza's like, I know Torah as well as anybody. I am an absolute scholar in Torah, and I am a Jew, and I love the Jewish people, but let me just tell you, there's no God who gave us the Torah, and God and nature are one and the same, and the inconsistencies in the Torah are a result of human, editing and blah, 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 blah. And they were just like, you have gone too far. Now, for us to hear those words now, it's hardly gone too far. I say half that stuff now. But that's just because 400 years later or 350 years later, we just feel way, way more comfortable with these words. But those words shook these people to their core back then, and they couldn't handle it. And so, as much as I disagree with how the rabbis handled it now, then I get it. I really do. This is one of those debates in which I feel as if there's, only in hindsight is there a right and wrong to me. Only in hindsight. But in the moment, I would have been utterly as flummoxed as everybody else. Yeah, I would have, yeah. Jim.
So Spinoza left Judaism, or he was expelled, but he did not become a Christian.
He never became a Christian, though he took on a Christian named Benedict.
In the time that he lived,
Benedict Spinoza is how, when you study philosophy in college, that's how you know him, not Baruch Spinoza. So he changed his name when he was excommunicated, but he never converted to Christianity.
well, he wrote in Latin too. So
That's true too, right? Because he knew
means
that.
Baruch.
Right.
But at the time that he lived, everyone was a member of some community. You were a Catholic or a Protestant or a Jew, and so he stayed outside of all.
He did. He had, I seem to remember, now I'm struggling, because I didn't go too deep into his life, all of his life story. I've learned it before and I've studied before, but I didn't do it for the sake of this, and I should have, but I just ran out of time. But he did have friends in his later years who he surrounded himself with, but he didn't, as you say correctly, he did not have a community. He wasn't a loner, but he didn't have a major community. That's true.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
If he says that God and nature is the same, then how would he have understood or discussed climate change, where man is destroying nature and now has beyond the tipping point of what's happening to our environment with rising sea level and everything else? So how would Spinoza have said that God is that?
He would have, look, your guess is as good as mine. However, I think he would have said that this isn't, God is nature, in that all of the laws of nature are God's laws of nature, but we have made adjustments to the world. Again, remember, he was 400 years before the concept of this, but we have made adjustments to the world. That means that nature is still happening exactly as it's supposed to.
Yes, that's true.
You just say this is exactly, that's what happens in nature when the temperatures rise, that the sea level increases. That's what happens. Nature, this is God's law.
So would he have been an observant of tradition or anything, or was
He was, at least at first. He did he went to synagogue.
But once he came up with these things, was this then antithetical to
Yes.
the laws?
Yes. He had a harder time in his observance. Not totally, but had a harder time in his observance. And what would end up happening is that at least the way that Goldstein talks about it, and that play, again, it's just a play. But I remember them talking about how when he was he would go to services and he'd be writing and writing and writing and writing and just kind of thinking and thinking. And I mean, he's one of the great intellects that the world has ever seen. And again, it's the shame that he died so early, because you got to wonder, what could he have produced had he lived 30 more years?
How long did he live after his excommunication?
I think 6 years.
How did he define what a Jew is? I mean,
It was,
if he
do
was
you,
against the covenant with God and denied that,
I think it was more about how you were born. You were born, this is your people, this is your,
so it was non-religious.
correct. Correct. Which, by the way, suggests, what about conversion to Judaism? And he would say certainly if you made the choice to be a Jew, then that you also. But again, I can't, some of these things, it's hard for me exactly to tell you what he would have said about it. But go ahead, Jim.
I think he would have said first that the moral laws are part of nature and reason, but the mitzvot are not, that they are not part of.
That's right.
They're simply something given to.
Right, so the notion of you can't mix linen and cotton in your garments, he would have said, this is a useless or irrelevant law. But honor your father and mother is a central thing, because he would be able to, he would arrive at that through reason. All right, I got 11:15, so we got one more. And it's kind of interesting. It's a conversation between Theodore Herzl, Achad Ha'am. I wrote Stephen Wise. It was just because my brain was thinking Stephen. It's Isaac Mayer Wise. Stephen Wise was from the 1950s. Isaac Mayer Wise was from the late 1800s. Herzl and Achad Ha'am also from the late 1800s. So, by the way, this is all original. Everything here is original. This debate never happened, obviously, and Theodor Herzl and Achad Ha'am never actually met each other or debated with each other, but they are understood to be somewhat of intellectual rivals. I.M. Wise was Isaac Mayer Wise, who was, by the way, the founder of Reform Judaism in America, in Cincinnati. Wise was never considered to be a rival or a jousting partner with any of these people, but I am inserting him in because it's just kind of another thought. Okay? So we need 3 readers for our last reading. Who wants to be Theodor Herzl? You have Herzl, who is Isaac Mayer Wise. Thank you. And Achad Ha'am. Thank you, Jim. Go ahead. Herzl.
The Jewish question still exists. It would be foolish to deny it. We have honestly striven everywhere to merge ourselves in the social life of surrounding communities and to preserve only the faith of our fathers. It has not been permitted to us.
Who's Wise again? Okay, go ahead, Lisa.
The persecution of Jews in Russia and Romania and the anti-Semitic hatred against the Jewish race and religion, as it still exists in Germany, Austria, and partly in France, roused among the persecuted and outraged persons the hopeless feeling of being hated strangers among hostile Gentiles. But here we are perfectly satisfied with our political and social position.
Let's hold on one second. Instead of continuing with the debate, let's just make sure that we're following this. So Herzl is saying, we got a problem. We are persecuted everywhere we go. We need a place. And Wise is saying, yeah, and remember, all 3 of them are at least 40 years before the Holocaust. Just want to make sure we understand it. Wise is saying, yeah, there's all sorts of problems everywhere, but guess where there's no problem? Right here in America. Okay, so now Herzl again.
We are one people, one people. We need the promised land where it is right for us to have hooked noses, black or red beards, and bow legs without being despised for these things alone, where at last we can live as free men on our own soil and die in peace in our homeland.
And Herzl says, and that place to just be free and safe is Israel. Achad Ha'am.
This is correct, but not specific enough. Do you see Israel being a Jewish state? or a state of Jews.
So Ahad Ha'am, who I said jousted with Herzl. And Herzl said, we need a place for Jews to be safe. And Ahad Ha'am said, yes, but if it's just a place, then what difference does it make? It needs to be a Jewish place. All right, like with Jewish theater and Jewish this and Jewish that. Doesn't mean everyone has to be, or just like our world needs to be a reflection of Judaism and not just a random place. So, Herzl.
Is there any difference?
Very much so. A Jewish state is one in which the foundation of the nation is a Jewish one. Our national holidays are Jewish. Our courts consider Jewish texts. Our schools teach Judaism. Our government is not separated from it.
A Jewish state is not my goal. I do not object to it, but I do not seek it. We need a state for Jews to feel safe.
It can make no difference to us in which particular spot on Earth's surface we occupy. We want freedom, equality, justice, and equity to reign and govern the community in which we live. All this agitation on the other side of the ocean concerns us very little.
Oh, wise. He's saying, we don't care but live here where it's all nice and good, where we run the government, run the weather, run the media. Keep going, Herzl. We are one people.
We are one people. Our enemies have made us one without our consent, as repeatedly happens in history. Distress binds us together, and thus united, we suddenly discover our strength. Yes, we are strong enough to form a state, and indeed, a model state.
Yep, Herzl wants it to be Israel. Wise?
You revive among certain classes of people the political national sentiment of olden times, and turn the mission of Israel from the province of religion and humanity to the narrow political and national field, where Judaism loses its universal and sanctified ground.
Zionism is a return to the Jewish fold, even before it becomes a return to the Jewish land.
Zionism is a momentary inebriation of morbid minds and a prostitution of Israel's cause to a madman's dance.
Nice, huh?
This filter's as good as mine.
God would not have preserved our people for so long if we did not have another role to play in the history of man.
Thank you. And by the way, and for anyone who objected to some of the male kind of centered language that all of these people used, I apologize, do not shoot the messenger. So hopefully you're hearing what is conceptually this important debate. Again, they never debated each other, but they did know to be kind of rivals was, again, Ahad Ha'am and Isaac Mayer Wise. Excuse me, Ahad Ha'am and Theodore Herzl. Both said they wanted Israel. But one said, we need Israel because I'm watching the Dreyfus case happen, in which this very, very high-ranking officer in the French army is being accused of trumped-up charges of treason, correct? And he ends up being thrown in jail. And I'm watching and reporting on this from my Austrian newspaper, and I'm realizing that this is a real problem that we have here, and that we need a place in which we're not just going to be immediately the one who is going to be accused of every bad thing. And Ahad Ha'am said, agreed, but it's not just about then just going and making Vienna of the Middle East where you are, and everyone's wearing top hats and walking around and seeing the opera. Rather, it's like, if we're going to do this, let's do this and design it and make it with purpose. By the way, Israel ended up being a blend of both. But Wise, on the other hand, he actually went the opposite of those two. And so again, he was the founder of the reform movement in America. The concept of reform wasn't called reform, but it was called other stuff, but it was liberal, but it started in Germany, but maybe 50 years. Reform Judaism is 1820 and later. And Isaac Mayer Wise is 1876. So we're talking, you get my point. So he's 50 years past the kind of the original ideas of reform movement. So he's pretty early in it though, and he's the head of it in America. And he says, anti-Zionist, correct. Which, by the way, is not something which was just unique to him. I remember, and I'll bet you do, some of you do as well, synagogues in your area, some of them were Zionist, some of them were anti-Zionist. In New Orleans, where I grew up, into the 1980s, one of the synagogues was anti-Zionist.
So is Orthodox Judaism. They wouldn't accept Israel without a Messiah, right?
Well, that's one type of ultra-Orthodox Judaism, which is called Niturei Karta, which is true. But their reason is because the Messiah hasn't come. Right. And the Reform reason was various different things. One of them was, those Jews over there give us a bad name. A. B, but more importantly was, if there is Israel, then that means that Jews should be there. And we don't like that argument of, this is okay to be a Jew here, but really you should be there. And they felt like it was marginalizing what they have done and created and built in the various different communities. And so the anti-Zionism was more about feeling like they, didn't want to be told that they were the afterthought Jews, but rather primary. We were, primary Jews.
Wise was an assimilationist.
He was.
I mean, he had Sunday services.
Right.
Organs.
Yes.
He had.
And that was still happening to,
Oh, the organs are okay.
Right. But my point being is that it was about, hey, they're giving us a bad name. That's one thing. But number two, and probably more important, they didn't like being told that the way that they were doing it was really not the authentic, real, or correct way. And so therefore there was an active anti-Zionist argument, decision, which was to say, don't tell us that we should be in Israel. This is where we're going to be.
That continued into the 1950s.
Later, like I said, even the 80s.
With the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, because I can't remember the date of the Cincinnati Declaration, which was, I think it was in the 1920s.
No, the Cincinnati one was in 1876, and then there was a second one.
Okay, and this was.
And then there was one in San Francisco, Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was in the 1870s. There was what's called the Platforms of Reform Judaism. And in the early Platforms of Reform Judaism, which is I think what you're talking about, the actual meaning, the platform was like, this is our missions, the Reform mission statement, that it actually was anti-Zionism. You do not need
What does it mean?
What's that?
I always think of like anti-Zionist.
No, it's not the same way it's now.
What does that mean?
Anti-Zionism means there is no need for you to be fighting for an Israel to be reestablished. Right. Yeah. There is no, when we have a perfectly good place right now, that's probably even better. And then once Israel was established, sure, yes, there are people over there, but that Israel is for a certain type of people, but not necessarily for us. And then, and then over time, the Reform platforms embraced Israel more and more. And now the concept of anti-Zionism is the Jews do not have a right to Israel, whereas it never was that way before. It was always, we as Reformed Jews have no need to be considering this as important.
I think one thing, I would never say like anti-Zionist, that's the wrong way to put it, but Israel, growing up, Israel was not important to our education. It was in a sense that we studied it and knew about it. But then, I'm 58 years old. When October 7th happened, I said, wait a second. And all of a sudden, like overnight, I realized like this is really important. And so I think a lot of it is context for like how you grow up. I mean, I grew up in a very reformed congregation.
Right. And if that's the case, then right, for sure you
Yeah, way more reformed this congregation. We had, I told you my rabbi, a very famous rabbi, of course, he wrote books with John Shelby Spong, the Archdiocese of Newark, very reformed, but I think when you see, when you can get kind of complacent and you can kind of see like, your people for it. So all of a sudden it gives you a lot of context. You can change your philosophy overnight, basically, I guess what I'm saying.
Well, look, for me, I mean, everyone here knows the type of Zionist I am. I'm a true Zionist. So for me, all of the language that our people have used, Reform movement has used, which has been even wishy-washy about Israel, has always disturbed me to my core. But at the same time, the way that the Reform movement addressed the issues of Israel was kind of I would just argue it as selfish. It was why do we need to be everyone needs just to figure it out for themselves, and it's not our job to be worrying about what's going on over there. And for that matter, and we don't like that they're judging us in the first place, right? So it was a very selfish kind of place, but that's, obviously, I mean, October 7th, if there's ever been a moment in time in which we have been reminded about just how linked Israel is with the worldwide Jewish community, October 7th proved it. I guess maybe 1967 and 1973 may have kind of engendered that same type of feeling in the diaspora. But again, 67 and 73, we were still within that place of lots of liberal Reform synagogues kind of denying the need, not the need for Israel, just the need for us and Israel.
I had a different approach having grown up with overt anti-Semitism. It was just normal. We couldn't live in certain places, we couldn't go to certain schools and so forth. And that was sort of normal. By having a fully functional, he said that there was no anti-Semitism, that was ridiculous, it was. But having a fully functional, before all this war stuff, Israel, in my mind, reduced the anti-Semitism here. Because it said that this Jewish community was so functional, it was so far ahead of everything of what they were doing, of taking the desert and making it forest and just increasing things for the world. It made it look like the Jews that were left in the United States weren't all that bad.
So it helped, yeah, it's true. Yeah. And to this day it helps. I mean, there's that famous, you've probably seen the Archie Bunker kind of little video clip that's been kind of going around. Maybe if you haven't, I've seen it now a bunch of times, in which it's, Archie Bunker, the racist, anti-Semitic, but he says something like, and I can't remember the exact line, but he's talking about how, don't mess with the Jews, because, in Israel, they go and they go shoot this place and they destroy this and that and everything, and they don't like it when people mess with them, something like that. But it's like straight from Archie Bunker's, and it was one just to give us, it's been going around just because it makes, in our modern lens, we're just feeling, when Sinwar and all this stuff happened, it's like, yeah, Archie Bunker called it. But the point is that, there is that sense of we are, not just this group that just leeches off of the nation that it's living in, but rather has the capacity to contribute and build something very meaningful and important. It's 11:31, and some of you have kids to get, others have grandkids to get, and others are just wanting to go get a bagel. So I thank you all for being a part of this with me. It's nice to see everybody on Zoom too, and I wish you the best, and I look forward to seeing you at our next stop. Thanks.
Aren't you going to say something about the guy coming on the 31st?
Oh, yeah, November 20th, by the way, November
Oh, it's
20th
November. Okay.
is, for those of you who watched, thank you for mentioning it. For those of you who watched the Uri Feinberg do his 8-part series on the history of Israel, he is going to be in town on November 20th. That's a Wednesday night, 7 p.m. He's going to do a session on what are Israelis feeling right now. Artwork, music, graffiti, poetry. How are Israelis feeling? Social media posts. How are Israelis feeling right now? Should be
this year.
here at the synagogue, and we'll do it on Zoom too if you need to. 7 p.m. November 20th. Sure.